Today's episode of Brews and the Boys is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/brews and the boys. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. It's time for a Shway Media Podcast.
Welcome to the Brews and the Boys podcast. We are your friendly neighborhood bar podcast. We drink cold beverages and we talk about America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. Every week we'll be giving you an in-depth look into everything the Cowboys are doing and what we can expect from the Cowboys. My name is Michael Sizemore. I've been following and writing about the Dallas Cowboys for many years and currently contribute to Blogging the Boys. You may follow me on Twitter at Mr. Sizemore and follow the podcast at Brews and the Boys. With me, as always, is my producer and football illiterate sidekick, Timmy Two-Step.
Hello, everybody.
Who has been relegated to a producer because he wished the Eagles to win the Super Bowl and made that happen in this world.
So Sophie's choice.
So now he does not get to do anything but just produce the show. But today we have a very special guest, somebody that I have worked with extensively back in 2014, I would say. We have Marcus Mosher from Pro Football Weekly, and he also hosts the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Marcus, how's it going, my friend?
I'm doing well, fellas. How you guys doing?
Good. You can find Marcus on Twitter at Marcus Mosher, at Marcus_Mosher, I should say. And today we're just going to, we had Tom Ryle from BTB over here, and Tom is a Jason Garrett disciple. Well, Marcus Mosher is not. So we have to get every side of the story here. And as a guy who, my personal opinion, I will say, just so we can have this out here for Marcus to use, I just believe that for this year, sure, let's have Jason Garrett be the head coach of the football team, because I don't think that there was anybody that they were going to get that would have been somewhat in the range of exciting. I just think that after he won Coach of the Year, he had a 9-7 year. We'll give it to you this year, but I do believe that everyone on that coaching staff is pretty much going to be under the microscope this year. So again, Marcus, thank you for joining us. Marcus and I, we started together at Cover 32 Dallas. Isn't that
That's
correct?
I think that was 2013. That was a while ago.
Yeah, it was even longer. 2013. I was the managing editor there, and Marcus was one of the front page writers for the Cowboys page there. So we've been buds for a while, and I just couldn't let my buddy Tom come on here and give Jason Garrett such a just amazing approval rating, as if he were one of the Obamas. But I had to have somebody come in and give the other side of it. So to start this out, I just want you to kind of before we get into some of the questions that I had for you, I want you to just kind of give your humble opinion of Jason Garrett in general.
Yeah, so somebody needed to come on this podcast and be the yin to Tom's yang. So let's break down Garrett as a head coach. I don't think he's an awful head coach, and I think that kind of gets lost on some of the tweets that I may send out, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But I don't think he's awful in the same way that I don't think like Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati is necessarily awful. These aren't guys that are continually going to be at the bottom of the league, but what they're going to do is they're going to put you in purgatory where you're at 8-8 or 9-7 every single year. You'll occasionally have a good year, you'll occasionally have a bad year, but they'll never be the coach to take you to the promised land. And I think Garrett from Monday to Saturday is a fantastic coach. I think he does a really good job managing players and personalities. I think he does a good job with roster building. Just when we get to game days, he has a hard time adjusting his scheme to what he sees on the field. So if you forced me to rank him as a head coach, I would put him somewhere between, maybe 11 and 15. So he's not a bad coach. I'm just not sure he is the coach to take you to the playoffs consistently and win multiple playoff games every single year.
I want to definitely talk about that there. So Jason Garrett, since he took over in the middle of the 2010 season, when everything just went, south, and he took over for Wade Phillips. When Jason Garrett, one of the things that have, as a guy that likes Jason Garrett, that has always bothered me, though, for me was, I don't know if you remember this, Marcus, but back in those times when Jason Garrett was an offensive coordinator for a long time, I think especially when he first got to the Cowboys, man, his whole ordeal was play calling. He was such a good play caller,
Sure.
and I felt like what was great about going into games against Jason Garrett is he was not afraid to put his foot on people's throats, so to speak. He would run up scores on people. He would do it in a respectable manner, but I just think that Jason Garrett was much more willing to take a lot more risk. And I think he does sometimes, show that he has the cojones, to run the ball on 4th and 1 with Zeke, and then, them have to bring out or run the football on 4th and 1 with Dak and have them have to bring out the index card. I do think that he does show some stuff sometimes, but I do agree with you there when you say that it's hard to see, is he necessarily the guy that can bring you further on, because in games, he does have a hard time saying, hey, this isn't working. But for the first question I have that I wanted to ask you is, do you believe that Jason Garrett maybe sometimes trusts the guys next to him too much, and maybe he should step in as a head coach and say, no, we're running the ball here, Scott?
Yeah, and I think this is a thing that he has done kind of throughout his career. He typically gets coaches around him that he is very close with, and he does not trust people that have a different personality with him or compared to him. An example is Bill Callahan, one of the best coaches that offensive line coaches that is in the league right now. They had a lot of success with Bill Callahan, but he did not trust Bill Callahan would run the exact scheme or would teach his offensive linemen exactly the way he wanted them to be taught. So he got rid of Callahan, despite him being one of the best coaches in the league, brought in a lesser coach to basically be a yes man. I don't think you can have that necessarily with your coaches. I think you need to have guys that have different ideas and different styles. You do have to be able to work together. But I do think he wants to completely have that full trust of his coaching staff, so he doesn't have to have to step in. And I actually think bringing in Scott Linehan has actually hurt his coaching ability now, because he's basically been a guy that is supposed to manage games, and I just don't think that's what he is good at. He is actually better as a play caller. That's what he was brought in to do in 2007, was to call plays and design an offense. And now that that's kind of been stripped of him, I'm not sure that this is the best spot for him to just be a guy on game days that, throws a challenge flag, gets the team riled up, or whatever he does on Sundays. I just don't think that's his best job. I think he needs to be actually designing an offense and calling plays to fully maximize his coaching potential.
So do you believe that Jason Garrett's tenure as the head coach with the Cowboys has come with some convenient excuses? And what I mean by that is, like, 2010 he takes over, Romo's already out there, is already out for the year. Then, he only has, in his entire coaching career with the Cowboys, he only has 2 years where Romo was actually at full health and played all 16 games. And you can still question the health there, because one of those years was he broke his ribs and, punctured his lung and stuff like that. And then this past year, he's got the kind of a big excuse that hung over that locker room, was the fact that Ezekiel Elliott was not on the field. So do you think that he's kind of had a lot of convenient excuses that you'd be like, are you willing to roll with him for this one more year just to see if, like, hey, let's see when everything's good, you're pretty good, but when everything goes south, you just don't seem to have it together?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go through the years really quickly. 2010, first year as a coach, Romo's not there. 2011, they're 8-7 going into that final game of the season, and Romo hurts his thumb, and they're playing in the rain in New York, and they lose that game and don't make the playoffs. 2012, same thing. They enter that Washington game in Washington, 8-8 or 8-7. Romo is dealing with a back injury. It's raining. Romo throws a couple interceptions. They lose that one. 2013 is a year where Romo gets hurt and misses 3 games. They have one of the all-time worst defenses in the league, and yet they still have a game at the end of the season to win, to get into the playoffs. And Romo hurts his back, can't play. Kyle Orton comes in, throws the interception. 2014 is the Dez catch. 2015, Romo and Dez are both basically knocked out for the season. 2016, he has rookies at quarterback and running back. And then 2017 was the Ezekiel Elliott, Tyron Smith, injuries and suspensions. So, yeah, every year there's a excuse. But the way that the NFL is, you're always going to be able to find an excuse. The Eagles are a perfect example this year of not making excuses and just getting the job done. They could have very easily, as soon as Jason Peters went down on that Monday night game, they could have packed it in and said, hey, it's not our year. Too many injuries. Let's shut it down. Instead, they persevered, and look, now they're Super Bowl champions. So you've got to be able to overcome some of this stuff. You can't put yourself into a position where one or two games is going to decide your season. And too many times they're just an average team and they're relying on this last week of the season to get into the playoffs. You can't do that. You've got to be a little bit more consistent than that.
No, I agree with you there, and I think that this year especially, I think they need to change their entire way that they look and go after players or anything, which is hard to do with Stephen Jones and dealing with kind of how he is and how it came out a stat today about how the Cowboys don't spend much money out there on of their salary cap. And I really think that the convenient excuse is kind of maybe a little bit harsh for Garrett. But yeah, he's dealt with a lot of stuff that a lot of other teams have dealt with. The Eagles just won the Super Bowl, having dealt with some depth issues, or having dealt with some injuries to their stars, but they had some better depth. So I think that also goes, when you look at it, you see the team there and you say, okay, so I've said it multiple times. I said, you put Chaz Green out there to play left guard, and that was a total mistake, and you basically created another problem for yourself last year because you didn't know who Chaz Green was perfect as a backup for Tyron Smith, played well in 2016, but then you go and put him somewhere else because you want him to win the job, and he doesn't win the job, and Jonathan Cooper's better than he is.
Sure. And
then you still want him to go out there and win the job. I think that there's lots of just bad examples of what they've done, but I want to get back to Scott Linehan real quick. By hitching the wagon to Scott Linehan again this year, and Scott Linehan, they've made a lot of different coaching moves and changes on that offensive side, that offensive coaching staff, but they're mainly Scott Linehan tied hires for 2018. So if all goes awry, I mean, this is going to bring down this entire regime, don't you think?
No, I was just talking about this with a friend today. Is what would have to happen for them to really fire Jason Garrett and this coaching staff? Because Jerry Jones loves Jason Garrett. He was just talking about a few months ago how he wants Jason Garrett to be the head coach for a long time, and he believes Jason Garrett is one of the best coaches in the league. And Jerry Jones backed it up by saying, hey, this is a guy that was the coach of the year in 2016. Why am I getting rid of him? Listen, the only way that I see them getting rid of everybody on staff is if they have fairly decent health and they still aren't producing. If they keep, Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott and Tyron Smith all on the field and they only win 5, 6, 7 games, then I can see it happening. But like we just discussed, this is the NFL. Injuries are going to happen. Things are going to happen. And there's probably going to be a convenient excuse that they can use. Maybe Dak doesn't have the receivers that he needs. Maybe they do cut Dez Bryant and they have a bunch of young receivers in there.
Which would be a terrible mistake. You and I both are on that train.
Absolutely. So I just don't think, unless something terrible or disastrous happens to this team this year where everybody completely quits on Jason Garrett like they did in 2010 with Wade Phillips.
Which they won't.
Correct.
They won't, because
And that's just something that Garrett's good at. So to me, what is going to define a successful season for the Cowboys? Is it going to be them making the playoffs? Is it going to be them, winning the division? Is it just not going anything worse than 8-8? I'm not sure. I guess I'm just not of the belief that the Cowboys are going to fire Garrett if they don't make the playoffs this season.
See, I think that you're onto something there. I do believe that they would possibly get rid of everyone around Garrett. I think that's a very big possibility. If it doesn't work offensively, let's just say, I think Scott Linehan's gone.
That's possible. Yep.
yeah, I don't necessarily think that means everyone's gone, because I think Sanjay Lal will get another year. I think that these other hires that they made, they will keep those guys around. They do like Gary Brown as a running backs coach. He's done a great job there. But I do believe that they will possibly be looking for another offensive coordinator if Scott Linehan does what he did this past year, which was basically, in my mind, not sure about yours, I think that he did such a tremendous job with Dak Prescott in his first year, and then the second year comes around and he tries to turn him into the quarterbacks that he likes, Mark Bolgers, Tony Romo's, Matt Stafford's. That is not Dak's game, and in an efforts of trying to do that, I think he made the team a lot worse.
Yeah,
I
like to call these guys QB bots, where basically they want the quarterback to basically do everything that is structured. They want it to be exactly the way the offense coordinator is. And I just don't think that's Dak's game. You need to let Dak play an up-tempo offense where he can use his strength as a runner and getting outside the pocket and making big plays down the field. They tried to make him too much of a pocket passer this year, and it hurt their offense quite a bit.
Yeah. And so we know, basically, we talked about what the qualities that you didn't really like about Jason Garrett was the fact that you just didn't really think that he was, he was great from the preparation standpoint, but then when you get to the game, he's just not an in-game good at adjustments. The whole staff's not really good at adjustments. So let's get down to the brass tacks here before we go to break. Let's rile some people up here. So people will read your tweets from a few weeks ago. I know Tom did, and will think that you root for the Cowboys to fail in 2018 in order for some changes to be made. That you want changes to be made so much on the Cowboys that you actually will root for them to fail just so you can be correct about Garrett and how he should not continue to coach this team. So tell me why that is either point blank spot on or just incorrect.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one. I won't root for this team to fail. I mean, if you are a Cowboy fan at all, you can never root against your team unless you're playing a meaningless Week 17 against the Eagles. But other than that, you can't root. You can't root for your team to fail. However, if you're really taking a 10,000-foot view of this and you believe that Garrett is not the answer to being a Super Bowl winning coach, kind of like I do, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for them to have one of those down years without injuries. But again, I'm not rooting for this team to fail. Obviously, I think they have a lot of talent. And when you get in the playoffs, if this team can sneak into the playoffs or whatever, you just never know what's going to happen. So I will never root for them to fail. But it would not be the worst thing in the world if they moved on from Garrett and they brought in somebody like Sean Payton, who they've had their eye on for a while.
So that gets us to the last part of this, Garrett, because we're going to do a 180 once we come back from this break. So you just said Sean Payton. So if Garrett had been fired in 2018, would Sean Payton have been your next guy? Is it because, the Jim Harbaughs, the Nick Sabans of the world that other people like to throw out there, they're not going to work with this ownership. I know that completely, that's just not going to happen. But is that your guy, or do you have your eyes on other guys too? Or are there some younger guys in the league that you have your eyes on?
Yeah, so the way the NFL is structured today, I almost think you have to go with an offensive-minded head coach because you have so many defensive guys rotating out of your roster all the time. It's just hard to build a really good defense. So I think you need to have a brilliant offensive mind. Sean Payton would be the number one guy on my list. He wants to be in Dallas at some point. I know most of his family lives here in Dallas. I think that would be ideal. We'll see what kind of offensive coordinators' names start to jump up this year. We had a couple. Frank Wright went to the Colts. Every single year we get some of those guys that develop. I still think Jim Harbaugh makes a lot of sense if the Cowboys do want to go that direction. I think he would like to get back into the NFL someday. Would he work with Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones? I'm not sure. But I think if you want a guy that's going to make your football team tough right away, it's Jim Harbaugh. So, yeah, those are the two names that I would be interested in, Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh.
But we could totally laugh at Nick Saban, right?
No, that's not going to happen.
Okay,
no, he's going to stay in Alabama forever.
Come on. Okay. I mean, Tom and I talked about that too. We just said Nick Saban is staying in Alabama. Why would you turn down that money? And secondly, think about when he was in the NFL before.
Yes.
He does not like not being able to control the media.
Right.
He cannot control the media when there's adults. Okay, this is an adult game. Okay, he can't control the media, so this is not a college program. Anyway, We are up against the break. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk more with Marcus Mosher. This time, we're going to talk about free agency and the draft and what Marcus thinks the Cowboys should do. We will be right back on the Brews and the Boys podcast here with Michael and Marcus.
Hey there, Cowboys Nation. Timmy Two-Step of Shway Media and the Brews and the Boys podcast here with a deal that you do not want to pass up. Are you ready for this? Right now, Audible is offering you, the listeners of the Brews and the Boys podcast, a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. Our host, Michael Sizemore, and I highly recommend Boys Will Be Boys, The Glory Days and Party Nights of the Dallas Cowboys Dynasty by Jeff Pearlman and narrated by Arthur Morey. I would give you a synopsis of the book, but I think the title is pretty self-explanatory, don't you think? All you need to do to get your free audiobook today is go to audibletrial.com/brewsandtheboys. Again, that's audibletrial.com/brewsandtheboys for your free audiobook. And now, back to the show.
All right, we are back on the Brews and the Boys podcast. We have Marcus Mosher. He is from Pro Football Weekly. He is the host of the Locked On Cowboys podcast that you can find on iTunes or anywhere, Stitcher, anything you find this podcast on, you can find that on there. We were talking about Jason Garrett, letting him lament about his feelings about Jason Garrett not being the right coach for the Cowboys to take them to the top. But now we're going to do a complete 180. We're going to talk about this year's free agency and the draft. So we're just going to start off the bat. If the Cowboys go after one free agent that's outside their locker room, who should it be, Marcus, and why?
Yeah, so I thought about this question a lot, and I'm looking at the free agent market. The one position I would like to grab is a receiver, but those guys get overpaid every single year, and there's not a lot of guys on the list that I think can make an impact. So the one guy on the offensive line that I think could help out is Justin Pugh of the New York Giants, hitting free agency after being drafted in the first round of 2013. He played right tackle for the Giants, was okay there, was a much better left guard. The Cowboys need a fix on left guard. They cannot continue to put Band-Aids on that position. I like Pugh because he gives you that versatility of not only having a guy that can play left guard, but that can kick out to tackle if you have an injury. I'm not sure what the money is going to be. I'm guessing it's going to be around $8 to $9 million per year. That's probably going to be out of the Cowboys' budget. But if they really want to shore up this offensive line, I think that's the way they need to go. Josh Sitton from the Bears, who's hitting free agency, is another interesting name to keep an eye on. But look for the Cowboys to at least sign one guard to kind of fill in that spot until at least we get to the draft.
Yeah, because as a subscriber to your podcast, because of course I've got to watch you blossom, Marcus. You're one of my boys. So
thank you.
I listen to your podcast every week, and they did discuss this. So go find the Locked On Cowboys podcast. He and Landon from BTB as well. They did this, or retired, as he's telling everybody.
He's not retired. Don't let him fool you.
He's not retired at all. He's not retired at all. But thanks, Landon, because I'm probably going to have to do the Blogging the Boys podcast too. Thank you, Landon. Yeah, so I agree with you there. I think that you and I share the same sentiment that, I think they should still get better than what they had with Jonathan Cooper, because in my mind, when Tyron Smith got hurt, that didn't just necessarily that pretty much put a stake in the heart of the left side of that line. Like they were a complete turnstile, because Jonathan Cooper, what we've always seen, even with Ron Leary played well with the Broncos, by the way, and then he got injured, unfortunately. But Tyron Smith, in between Tyron Smith and Travis Frederick, you do not need this like amazing player, but now I think you do, just because you saw what happens if Tyron Smith goes down. Their left side of that line is so compromised that it would be good for them to try to go after a Justin Pugh, who was probably the only offensive lineman on the New York Giants that was really any good. We don't want to talk about Eric Flowers. That is a fair take, I think. That is not a Stephen A. Smith take. That's just a really good take. That was a bad offensive line, but Pugh has been pretty good, and I think that he's good. There's another guy from the Titans, Josh Klein, I think is his name. He's another good guy that might be cheaper than Pugh, but what would be a good idea to bring on there. But something has to happen. And I know the Dane Bruglers of the world, they don't want the Cowboys to draft a left guard in the first round. But what about you? What do you think? Do you think a left guard in the first round is totally plausible?
Yeah, I think Isaiah Wynn at number 19, the left tackle from Georgia, who probably is going to play guard in the NFL. He's my number 16 player on the board. I think he is a phenomenal guard. If you take him, slide him in at left guard, I think you have a Pro Bowl player by year 2. So I have no problem taking a guard there if you believe he is worth the pick and you're not reaching. And in this case, you're not going to be reaching if you take Wynn. So I'm 100% fine with that pick.
All right, so we're going to move on here to the receivers. You just kind of glossed over the receivers in free agency. Most of the ones that are worth it are going to get tagged. So it's not really anything you need to look at as far as finding, unless you want to find just, a John Brown or somebody that needs a second chance, somebody that's had some injury problems or something like that. But talking about the draft, I do know that you're really not in favor necessarily of taking a receiver in the first round, unless maybe Calvin Ridley fell there. But do you think the Cowboys? But do you think the Cowboys can find a suitable Z receiver to pair with Dez Bryant in this draft? And if so, which prospects do you believe fit the bill?
Yeah, they can absolutely find a Z receiver in this draft. It's going to be no problem at all. So I'm not opposed to drafting a receiver in the first round if it's Calvin Ridley. It wouldn't be my favorite selection, but if you draft Ridley, that's a really high-end number 2 receiver that you feel really good about putting on the field day 1. But the reason why I'm not a huge fan of the pick is because you can get that same quality of player at 50 and even 81. I like DJ Moore from Maryland a little bit. He's a smaller guy, but man, he's tough to tackle after the catch. He is just a really physical receiver. Yep, go ahead.
He's Steve Smith Sr. He really is.
Yes,
to
he
me.
is.
When I watch him on the field, I know other people have. Dane Brugler has compared him to Golden Tate as well. That type of receiver. He might be a little smaller, but he doesn't play small at all. He's phenomenal.
He accounted for 57% of Maryland's receiving yards this year, 51% of their touchdowns. He's just 20 years old. He battled an ankle injury all year, but you would never know by watching the tape. I think that's a guy that's going to get better and better every single year. Won't surprise me if you're talking about a Stephon Diggs type of player 2 or 3 years into his career. Michael Gallup from Colorado. Has a little bit more of the size that the Cowboys look for in their Z receiver at about 6'1", 202 pounds. He's got the downfield speed. I think he might be one of the better route runners in this class. Anthony Miller from Memphis, super quick, reminds a lot of people of Antonio Brown. I think he's a little bit more of Emmanuel Sanders. We'll see how that foot is coming out of the combine, but that's a guy, if you can get him at 50, I think has a chance to be a star in the NFL. And then if you want speed, DJ Chark from LSU, hit 23 plays over 20 yards this year, probably the best deep ball receiver in the class other than James Washington. So those are just a couple guys to keep in mind on day 2 of the draft.
If they were able to, because I'll be in, are you going to be in Dallas for the draft, by the way?
I won't be, actually.
Okay, I will be in Dallas, but if they do draft DJ Moore at 50, the loud screaming that you hear that you can hear outside your apartment of just elation, that will be Michael Sizemore in Dallas with my producer Tim, who's going to be like, DJ Moore, okay, DJ Ray J.
We'll be in
cares?
unison.
Who cares?
It'll be awesome.
Yeah, I'll call you and just be like, yay, we got it right. So I got another question for you, because you did talk about on another podcast I heard recently about Harold Landry and just how he fits an underrated need that the Cowboys have at that weak side defensive end, if you want to say, but it's really the right end. Explain that player and where the Cowboys would have to get him if they wanted to go after Harold Landry.
Yeah, so Harold Landry in 2016 was, I think, the best pass rusher in the entire college football outside of Myles Garrett. 2017 dealt with a foot injury that limited him throughout the year. This might be a scenario in which the Cowboys get a player that should never have been there for them at 19 because of an injury. We'll see how he tests at Indy this week at the Combine. But that's a guy that can come in right away and give you production off of that edge. If you're telling me the Cowboys' biggest need on defense, it's still the hole that they have on the right side. They're playing Tyrone Crawford there. They played Benson Mayowa there last year. They don't really have anybody that can give them that speed off the outside, unless it's Randy Gregory, who we're starting to hear whispers about might be applying for reinstatement here in March. We'll see. But Landry is a guy that I think has top 7, 8 upside in terms of players in this draft. He just needs to prove he's healthy. And if he is, you're getting an absolute steal at 19 overall.
Yep. So you don't think there's any way the Cowboys could trade back possibly a few spots and get him? You think they got to, if they want him, they just got to get him at 19, pull the trigger right there?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because you're looking at the teams after them. Detroit doesn't really have a pass rusher. Ezekiel Ansah is expected to hit free agency. And we know how fast pass rushers get gobbled up in this league. So he might – listen, if he tests well at the combine and the medicals come back clean, there's a pretty good chance that he will not be available to them at 19.
Yeah, for me, Landry is my number 2 defensive end after Chubb. I'm not sure about you, but he is my number 2 pass rusher after Chubb there. And last, we just want to ask you about the prospects in this draft. There's been a lot that have been linked to the Cowboys. Which ones excite you most, and which ones kind of give you a little bit of hesitation, trepidation, whatever you want to say, of just like, ooh, I hope that they don't go that route?
Yeah, so let's start with a guy that gets me excited. That's Derwin James, the safety from Florida State. The Cowboys it sounds like they're moving Byron Jones to cornerback, which I think that's a smart move. I love Byron at safety. I think he can be a special corner. But if they do decide to do that move, they don't really have a true safety that can match up against tight ends. They're going to probably try to play Kavon Frazier in the box. They have Xavier Woods, who could play a little bit down there, but he's a smaller safety. And then Jeff Heath, obviously, is your free safety. Derwin gives you an athlete that can make plays all over the field. Their new defensive back coach, Chris Richard, he likes to have these big, rangy, athletic guys in the middle of the field, a la Cam Chancellor. If Derwin James falls to the Cowboys at 19, I think he can be their version of Cam Chancellor, and I think he can do that job very, very well. And as for a guy that makes me a little bit nervous, that's Maurice Hurst. Now, I love Maurice Hurst, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. I really like what he can do, but it makes me nervous as to what their plans are with David Irving. I think David Irving is a special, special talent. When he is playing and he's on the field, there might not be 10 better defensive linemen in all of football, but if they draft Hurst, to me, that means probably the Cowboys long-term are envisioning David Irving not being part of their roster.
Yeah, and that would be another mistake that we will save for another time. But we want to.
I agree.
We want to thank Marcus Mosher for joining us. You can find him on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also find his work. You can find his podcast on the Locked On Cowboys podcast. You can find his work at Pro Football Weekly. This is Marcus Mosher. Thank you, Marcus, for coming in and giving these Cowboys fans something to sink their teeth into, whether it be they just want to get their pitchforks and run out there with you with Jason Garrett, or if they just want to know some draft picks and stuff that they should be looking at here. And we will check back in with you, Marcus, as soon as the Cowboys make some moves here and we know more about things that are going on. Thank you again for joining the podcast. We want to thank you guys for listening. This has been the Brews and the Boys podcast. Please remember to leave us a review in iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Brews and the Boys. Don't forget to follow Marcus Mosher at Marcus_Mosher. Don't forget to check our Patreon page and gain access to early releases of this episode on Patreon. And the link in the show description will get you to the Patreon page. Have a great night, Cowboys Nation. We will see you again soon.
Now this is podcasting.